6 foot tall Pākehā male. I'm legally blind. I usually, I'm sitting here with one headphone over my ear and checking into a computer occasionally. 3 years ago at the start of this inquiry, I had brown hair and now it's gone grey. Can I start by acknowledging the concessions? Thank you for those, and also acknowledging some of the good things that are happening, the establishment of whaikaha, the beginnings of enabling good lives. But I think there's a general theme of that this group of ministries and successors have been slow to learn, slow to act, and I'd say even slow to take accountability, responsibility for what's happening. And also across all the ministries we've seen, it'd be fair to say that the response to the requests that produced from the Ministry of Health was by far the least thorough, and also the least, and was actually almost denying of the responsibility around historic abuse and care. That doesn't give me a lot of assurance going forward that the struggles to actually, the slowness to learn, the slowness to act, and the slowness to take accountability. There was a phrase, I think, in your evidence, Mr. Woods, about not to repeat errors of the past. I think errors is just such an understatement. This was absolutely horrific, what happened under the watch of the Ministry of Health and its departments, successive agencies over time. Over-medicalisation, developing tools designed to shock and torture people, extreme use of seclusion, and the slowness, even when these have been brought to the attention through the Burns report, through the Commission of Inquiry, the number of years it's taken to respond. And today the role of EGL has been so slow, it seems, that the changes to the proposed changes to the Ministry of to the Mental Health Act. I've been involved in this independent monitoring mechanism processes as well, going to Geneva, and the recommendations for change around legislation. I think since the last time, only one piece of legislation has changed around the Oranga Tamariki Act. Yep, okay. Other legislation which has been identified since 2007 and the 2008 CRPD hasn't changed. I think people acknowledge the legislative and policy settings up to 1999 enabled ableism and abuse. And I don't think, apart from that one piece of legislation, there hasn't been any other legislation change in the area. Just some of the things that we heard, I would like some more genuine acknowledgement and about what has happened. Was it genuine horror? And going back to our first contextual hearing, when Sir Robert Martin, apart from his own abuse, talked about witnessing boys who had toileting accidents hosed down using fire hydrants, hosing their private parts so that they couldn't even stand up. And what he witnessed was this was punishment. And it was a message to him, don't do this. Do you accept that punishment occurred in these places, in psychiatric institutions?
First of all, of course, I was utterly appalled. The listening to the evidence that has been given by survivors and reading their briefs, there's not really words strong enough. It's heartbreaking, and it's awful. And as my colleague said earlier on, absolutely awful to read, and really hard to even imagine what it would be like to live through. That's not something that I have personal experience with, and I can't even imagine what that would be like for the person or their whānau. The people who love them. So, that's utterly appalling. As you've heard, we've read a series of acknowledgements which are absolutely genuine. I apologise for your sense of the response of the Ministry of Health in relation to the request for. Sorry, I'm losing my words now. It's getting to be a long day. The thing, but absolutely, those acknowledgements are genuine, and to the survivors, their experience was inexcusable and awful.
Do you accept that places that were supposed to provide care actually punish people for accidents that were beyond their control?
I've heard that evidence, and that evidence is appalling, and yes, I accept that evidence. Yep.
And do you accept that the levels of pain, emotional and physical, were severe?
Yeah, as per our acknowledgements, absolutely appalling, and lifelong effects from that.
And across this time period, we've seen experimentation, extreme ECT, lobotomies, all of these things.
All of those things, yes.
Geraldine here. I just reiterate what Dr. Safati has said, is that any form of abuse or neglect is just totally and completely unacceptable, and the stories are heart-wrenching.
Yeah. There's a comment, I think this was from Dr. Crawshaw, about this institutions, the scale of them promoted almost a deviation from social norms all of their own. Does this happen in large providers today? Can it happen in large providers, that deviation from social norms?
I would hope not. I think that we have more checks and balances in place that should stop it, but I think that there's always continuous improvement. I think that there are, I think with big providers, they in themselves need to be checking that the way they operate isn't in the nature of an institution. But I think that, well, one of my colleagues probably can answer better in terms of the checks and balances that the Ministry have put in place, are hopefully ensuring that the abuse that we've seen in the big institutions is not occurring.
I think it's Aaron Culver here. I think that it is a very important reminder of why the institutions were closed, and an absolute imperative that we never go back to the age of institutionalisation. In terms of current provider frameworks, I think that there is a risk that institutional behaviour can arise even in small services, and that is where the checks and balances need to be applied. But also there is a responsibility and an accountability for establishing a culture that does find that conduct abhorrent and that does seek to accord people their rights to provide choices and to treat people with parity of esteem.
Yeah. Going back to Ms. Woods, I hope not to, in terms of, but the fundamental question, are disabled people safe, for example, in residential care today?
I think Amanda is standing to say something.
Amanda speaking. I'm going to make a couple of comments. In my experience, when things go wrong, I look to the top of an organisation and how the chief executive is responding. And when I hear about a situation of abuse or neglect, I call the chief executive and I ask them how they're responding. And in the most recent example, the chief executive and his senior managers were horrified. They drove to the centre or out of town to where that incident had occurred. They immediately contacted the police. They immediately did an investigation. They did everything we could have expected, and they were shocked that their systems had let them down. Earlier in my time at the ministry, when things have gone wrong, we've had different experiences from chief executives who haven't taken responsibility. And it is my experience that the chief executives in the bigger organisations take their responsibilities very seriously and can expect to have a conversation when we hear about things.
It's good to hear that there was that response. It's not so good to hear that the abuse occurred.